Hello and welcome to Lone Star Silver Screen, a podcast dedicated to everything that exists at the intersection of Texas and the movies. I'm your host, Austin Zook. This first episode is a conversation between myself and a good friend of mine, filmmaker Bart Weiss, about Errol Morris's landmark documentary, The Thin Blue Line. But before we jump to that conversation, I wanted to welcome you to the show. Thank you for taking the time to listen and introduce myself. And also, I wanted to set some expectations. I am a film lover and journalist based in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in Texas, and I love the state's film culture and ties to film history. Lone Star Silver Screen is my attempt to explore and celebrate both of those things. Now, in this first batch of episodes, I insisted on doing everything myself. The show has been in the works for a long time, and I wanted to build it and know it from stem to stern. I had to find the shape of it, which meant only outsourcing things I absolutely could not do myself, like making intro-outro music. So, in these first episodes, you will hear me experimenting with different equipment and recording setups. I play with the form and the tone of the show. I want it to be educational without feeling like homework and entertaining with substance. The result is imperfect, but I'm still very proud of it and excited to share it with all of you. Obviously, none of this would have been possible without the support of my guests, all of whom are infinitely smarter and more charming than I am, and were so generous with their time, speaking with me about films that we mutually adore and the Texas film industry itself. Through our conversations, I believe they illuminate things that are exciting and essential about the topics we discuss on each episode. So without further ado, I'm going to go to my conversation with Bart Weiss about Errol Morris's The Thin Blue Line. Thank you again for listening. If you are not familiar with The Thin Blue Line, this is an American documentary that was released by Errol Morris in 1988. The film is essentially Morris's investigation of the 1976 shooting of Dallas police officer Robert Wood. Over the course of the film, he speaks with and investigates the case against Randall Dale Adams, who was convicted of the shooting, and through his investigation uncovers a number of irregularities. Morris's work on this film has been hugely influential over the decades since it was released. Even if you've never seen The Thin Blue Line, you have definitely felt its impact if you've ever watched a Netflix true crime documentary. At the time of its initial release, it was considered innovative and evolutionary for a documentary because of its use of reenactment. I wanted to talk to Bart about The Thin Blue Line because, as a documentarian himself and someone who has interviewed Morris on multiple occasions, I really wanted to get his take on The Thin Blue Line's place in documentary history. And I figured, what better way to kick off my podcast than with a murder mystery? Art, I want to thank you for joining me today for the show.
Great to be here.
Well, it's fantastic to have you. I start every episode of this show by asking an icebreaker question. So it's an over-under question. I'm going to give you a topic, and you tell me if it's overrated or underrated.
Okay.
Your topic is seeing documentary films in a theater.
I think it's underrated. Documentary films are really good to see with an audience and to experience with an audience and to see on a big screen. Now, there are a lot of great documentaries you can see on your computer, and that's not a bad experience. It's a great experience. But I think, well, for one, if we don't go to movie theaters, they may not exist. So I think it's really important. And we have here in Dallas so many really good movie theaters. And so going out and seeing them in a theater is really kind of important. And there are some films like the Brian Eno film, which was, I think, only in theaters and where each screening was different, is a really, kind of a wonderful thing.
So we're talking about The Thin Blue Line today.
Yes.
Did you see that film in a theater?
Yes.
Originally back in 1988?
Yes.
So going back to it, I mean, this is considered a landmark feat of documentary filmmaking. What was your reaction to it at the time? Did you see it as that immediately?
Yes. Okay. But you have to understand that it's a very special screening that I went to here in Dallas because the film takes place in Dallas. That film premiered at the USA Film Festival at the Angelica Theater here in Dallas.
Which is still operational.
Still operational. And that's where I saw the film for the first time.
Was Errol Morris there?
I think so, but I don't remember. I do remember that I had never seen any documentary like that. It was just mind blowing to sort of see that, and particularly that film, because it is so theatrical in the way that it works. Seeing it in a movie theater is such a different experience than seeing it on a television, even on a good big television, which is nice. But that's the kind of film that really kind of speaks to the large screen.
So was it mostly the reenactments that were really catching your attention, or was it something else that he was doing?
Well, obviously that it took place in Dallas. Some kind of, and remember, I saw this knowing nothing going in. Most people, when they saw it in general release, might have read a review or knew something or had something to do. I just walked in with no knowledge, and like there was that. And then the first time that you see the incredible way that he constructs the film and has all these overly stylistic reenactments, it just blew me away, because while reenactments have been around since the beginning of documentary, of course, Nanak of the North, what is generally thought of as the first documentary, even before the term documentary was around. But there were elements of that were staged. There were things in that film that were not what was current practice among the of that era. So there is a kind of way of constructing material for a documentary and a film that have been part of what we've done, but they always have been done in a way to make them seem more natural. And this film set out and created a new visual language for documentary, where he was using theatrical techniques, slow motion, using actors, and doing them in a way that is really dramatic to completely reinvent the documentary. And I don't think documentary has been like it was before that film.
What kind of an impact did it have on you and your work as a documentarian?
Well, it certainly made me think that documentary films could be different. So I went to my undergraduate schooling was at Temple University, that had a special program on documentary films. And they were also very interested in ethnographic films. And we were very much about, being true to the moment. And this was not the way that we would think a documentary would be. It was just not what we would think of as a documentary film, but yet it works in service of a story that is a real story. So as long as the audience believes that the story is true and real, having things that are artificially created works really well. But we get into this situation, which is now much more of a problem given AI and how AI images are coming. It is very important in a documentary film for the audience to believe that what you're saying is true. And when you have AI images, how does the audience know that this is genuine? And this is a slippery slope, and it's something that documentary filmmakers are talking about. I was at an academic conference, University Film and Video Association, and there were many panels on AI in documentary filmmaking, some of them about how to do it, some of them about how to teach it, but also about what are the ethics involved. How can you make sure that we as documentary filmmakers are telling you true stories and can be trusted? Because if that trust is gone, the whole idea of having a documentary is useless.
Well, I want to ask specifically about the Dallas of this film.
Yeah.
So this movie is about somebody who was convicted of the killing of a Dallas police officer in the 1970s. Errol Morris gets involved and does this kind of incredible investigation into the facts of the case. What was the response of the city at the time? Do you remember this being a conversation point?
I was more of an aesthetic conversation point, and I don't think I saw any articles about what did Dallas do wrong and in all of that. But it was very much of a big deal. Oh, by the way, there's an element, something you should know. So Errol Morris is a quirky guy.
Yeah.
So he took the chair around. Everybody that sat in an interview sat in the same chair.
Really?
Yes.
That's so interesting.
But that shows you the level of detail that he is interested in.
Yeah.
That is really kind of incredible. Also, do you remember near the end of the film? I haven't watched it in a long time, but I remember near the end where you have the sense of what really happened. The way he shot the audio cassette playing is again something that we haven't seen in a documentary film. It kind of taking that, it's like it's the typical documentary problem. I have audio that's very important. How do I make that work within the film? But if you're already starting a visual language for the film where we are being expressionistic, having beautiful ways to watch an audio cassette play, I thought is really interesting. And as I'm saying those words, I'm thinking there are probably some young people who have no idea what an audio cassette is.
Well, if they watch the film, they're going to find out. Well, so there is a conversation on the Criterion channel that was recorded with Errol Morris back in 2014, where he's talking about the film and how he got into this. And he talks about that moment specifically because he had a really hard time getting an interview set up with David Harris.
Yeah.
And the reason was David Harris was on death row at the time, and the Texas Department of Criminal Justice would not allow inmates on death row to be in the same room as someone.
Would you like to say who David Harris was?
Yes. David Harris was a young man who Randall Adams, the person who was convicted of this murder, always claimed was actually the murderer in this situation. And David Harris ended up going to prison many years later for a different murder. And then while he was there, Errol Morris found out about this case, got involved, started talking to him. And eventually, it leads up to this moment at the very end of the film that you're talking about, where he captures on tape David Harris admitting that he knows the other man, Randall Adams, is innocent.
I should know I was there. What the exact words were, but it is incredibly powerful. It's just there was one of the interviewees who knew him and knew that he was guilty because he was a real shit.
Yeah.
And I found his interview really kind of important. And but the film also goes through the court case and how it was and how some of the people who were testifying were perhaps not ethical people.
Yeah. And there's a moment where one of the women who testified, he gets her on camera saying that everywhere she goes, there are murders. And she's like, and I'm always trying to solve them and figure out who did it. I'm playing detective. And he was like, that's incredible that she would just say that to me. And so the thing about the David Harris tape recording interview is he finally got to film David Harris because he was transferred to another location. But then whenever he did this, after months and months of trying, the camera broke. And so he had to go in with a tape recorder. And that's why he only has the audio for that incredibly important moment in the film. But I think, like you said, he does a really great job bringing that all together.
And to me, it works really well. I don't know that I would have liked it better if I would have just seen him.
Yeah.
Because we've seen him before in other interviews, but it adds a kind of mythology to it as we don't see it.
Well, one thing I thought was really interesting was, would he have been willing to say that on camera? I felt like maybe having the tape recorder there made him more willing to be open in that moment.
Well, there is a sense that people will tell you things differently with just audio than they will with picture.
Yeah.
But his character was such that I think that he would have done it anyway.
Yeah.
You sort of play to his ego and he'll tell you anything.
Yeah. And then Errol Morris a little bit, right? You've had him on your show?
I have interviewed him twice.
Okay.
And so the first time, I forgot the film we were reviewing, but it was with my former podcast host, Chris Llewellyn-Reed, who's a very good film critic. But in the middle of the interview, Chris had said something about he liked this film, but he didn't really like another film. And then the two of them got into this fight. It's just like the whole tone of the interview after that went really bad.
Yeah. Did the second interview go?
Second interview went well because Chris wasn't on it. And I made sure to to not say anything that would piss him.
Yeah. Okay, good.
These are lessons to learn.
So the Thin Blue Line comes relatively early in Morris's career.
It was his breakthrough film. I mean, his first film was a good film and it played a few places, but I think Thin Blue Line really sort of broke him out into the sort of mainstream.
In the context of everything he's done since, I mean, do you feel like this is of a piece with his work and where he's gone later in his career?
Yeah, I think this essentially sets the language of how he works and how he thinks about what documentarians call B-roll, which is, the visual information that supports what interviews say. And that he has a way of using theatrical elements of cinema in a way that is very powerful. And he still does that. And what was the film he made about immigration? Separated. But that's the film we interviewed there. So there's a pod about that. But his building all of those sets and having those characters and being able to follow a family going through this connected to the interviews of people telling you what's going on, I think is really powerful. So what's happened is over the years since that first film, he has gained more strength as a narrative filmmaker, because it's one thing to follow people and to interview people. It's another thing to build a universe.
Yeah.
And to build a universe, you need set designers and you need to work with actors. And those are not necessarily skills that documentary filmmakers sort of grow up with. Documentary filmmakers are concerned with the truth. They're not like, how do I get a great performance from this person? And because there's no documentary training for that. But I think that over the years, he's gotten really good. And, there has always been this line between construct and real. And I think that he has sort of pushed that line really well, and that I think other people have sort of followed his lead in that.
I think that one interesting thing he says in that video on the Criterion channel is he's talking about this postmodernist reading people have of Thin Blue Line, where they look at it as an investigation of whether or not you can ever know the truth of an act. And he really pushes back against that. He says, that he really believes there is such a thing as the capital T truth, and you can get to the bottom of it if you do the work and you really pay attention to the evidence and you're willing to follow it. What do you think of that?
So I think the film shows both sides. So we do know that we do learn at the end what happened. So we did learn, but there is that one interview with that woman who is a very unreliable witness. And you go through in the film and see how incredibly unreliable she is. So in some ways, memory is faulty. And so if all relying on is memory, there's a very good chance that what you think is real may not have been. But there also is objective truth.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about the landscape of documentary filmmaking today, because it feels like, not that documentary filmmaking has ever been a blockbuster enterprise, but it feels like it's been kind of relegated to these true crime docuseries on Netflix and what have you, for the most part, at least in popular consciousness. Why do you think that is? And do you think there's a way to really push it back into the mainstream?
Well, the documentary world is a very difficult place. It's kind of really crazy because on one level, there are more documentaries being made all the time.
Yeah.
I get emails every day, like 3 or 4 of them about some new documentary that's, being shown in some theater where I can't see it, or maybe coming to a theater. But the problem is streamers.
Yeah.
So in the early days of streaming, a lot of independent documentaries were picked up and shown, and it was really kind of great. And this is not just about streaming. The same thing happened when cable TV came out. In the early days of cable TV and HBO, they would show short films, experimental films, and documentary films, and all kinds of things. And HBO did continue to have a very, very good documentary unit. And they were showing all kinds of fascinating documentaries and supporting a level of people that were really good. But aside from them, there was not much else around. So when streaming comes around in the beginning days, there's lots of them. And now they realize, of course, they have numbers on everything. what are people watching? They're watching crime and celebrity. And so what has happened is that there is this whole universe of documentary filmmakers who are making these films that go to streamers. And then there's everything else. Right. And there's a real problem in the documentary world at the moment that theatrical is very hard. Now, some documentaries get into theaters, but the Academy Award-winning film from last year, No Other Land, has no distributor. Just think about that for a second. No distributor has picked up the Academy Award-winning documentary film. That's never happened before. And it did get some screenings. They went from place to place, and they would have some interesting screenings, but it still doesn't have a distributor. So there is this real problem about these independent films. So where can we see them? We can see them in film festivals. So film festivals is becoming the distribution or exhibition mechanism. It's not distribution because you don't make money showing your film at a film festival. So people are making these films, and the films are getting, it's really fascinating because it's both cheaper in many ways because you can shoot it in your phone, but it's expensive in many ways because there are lawyers you have to have. Getting archival footage gets to be more expensive. There are a lot of ways that are getting to be more expensive to get something out there in the public and to get all the clearances done to make that happen. And there is no infrastructure or getting payback for these independent documentaries. And that's a real problem. And I don't know what the answer is. And the other side is from the funding side, a lot of great documentaries were funded through NEA money or state money that comes from the NEA. And that money is gone. And so where are the alternative funding structures? ITVS, which was Independent Television Service, which is a separate part of CPB, that independent filmmakers work to get established so that independent films would find a place on public television. And that was around for a long time. And then, that money's gone. So there's a real problem in both funding independent films and seeing independent films. Yet, independent documentary films are not dying. There are lots and lots of them. But getting a way for people to make a living doing it is harder and harder.
Well, one thing that Errol Morris talks about is that he couldn't make a living in filmmaking at first, and so he literally became a detective,
Yes.
and that helped him go down this path, which I thought was really interesting. Is there anything else that you want to touch on about the thin blue line or the state of documentary filmmaking before we wrap up?
Well, so there is something you can do who are listening to this. At wherever you live, someplace, there is a theater that will show a documentary film. And if people come and see those films, then there'll be more of them being shown. So really, it's a lot about what an audience can do and support. And when you see more independent documentaries, ones that are not necessarily about celebrity or crime, and even though Thin Blue Line is about a crime, it is a film that transcends its genre. It's a great film. But go out and seek different kinds of films and read film critics who talk about different kinds of films that help you sort of up your expectation. So don't just kind of scroll through and see what's on Netflix or something, but be proactive and look for things that are going to inspire you. Documentaries help us see our world in a different place, in a different way. And we are in this moment when the truth is taking a real beating. We have a president who lies like every sentence. Watching documentaries that tell the truth, that show us the truth, is a way for us to reclaim the notion of truth in a world where lies are becoming accepted.
Bart, thank you for joining me today. If the people want to follow your work or learn more about your career, where can they go? What do you need to plug?
Well, the VideoFest site is videofest.org. I have two podcasts, The Fog of Truth, which is about documentary films. There are many of those. And then there's Frankly Festivals, which is a podcast about film festivals. And if you enjoy what I've been talking about, every week I write a newsletter. And if you go to videofest.org and sign up for the newsletter, Yeah, and as soon as I get home, I'm going to finish writing that.
All right, Bart, thank you very much, and we'll do this again soon.
Forward to it.
And that was our first episode. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to rate, review, and follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'll be back next week with a new episode discussing Ethan Hawke's biopic of musician Blaze Foley, Blaze. Until then, I'll see you at the movies and on the dusty trails of Texas.